Welcome back. The Stats SA second quarter report on the gross domestic product indicates that the South African economy realized a 3.1% growth. This has fueled optimism about the economy, even though events of this week may have taken the shine off South Africa's image abroad. Earlier, the Minister of Finance, Tebogo Khaas, published a report on inclusive growth. And a couple of days ago, the country hosted the World Economic Forum Africa version in Cape Town. I'm now joined by Mr. Tebogo Khaas to talk to me about his Forum for Small Businesses view of these developments in the country. Well, I suppose it's a piece of good news, the fact that the GDP at least grew by 3.1%.
It is. We needed this historic relief, Tim, because considering what is going on in the country now, I mean, the kind of things that we are grappling with, we can use every little bit of good news. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And
but you know,
in the economy is the best way to get such good news.
Interesting that the numbers came out the way they did earlier this week. But last week, when Minister of Finance came out with his report for public comment, it was, poo-pooed by a lot of people, especially those who are closer to the system, the unions, for instance, and the political formations, or some of them, saying that ideologically it is unsound and thus creating doubt, I think, in the public's mind that this approach by the Minister of Finance will make any difference. I mean, members of the public haven't had any chance to say anything about it. What is your view about the management of the South African economy? It looks like we're not sure which direction we want to take, and whenever a step is taken, then whoever is taking that step gets kicked around.
Very interesting, but it should have been expected in any event. I mean, given the fact that we've got a tripartite alliance, but when we last voted in May, I didn't see tripartite alliance or any party called that. I saw ANC. Now to have an SACP or a COSATU coming on and say, look, we don't like this policy and therefore you should engage on it, or you shouldn't even consider rolling out such a policy and calling it neoliberal as they do, for me it's quite unbelievable. And I think it reminds us that the ANC once again ought to make a decision and respond to growing call that it should cut the umbilical cord between itself, the SACP, and the COSATUs of this world. And if COSATU and SACP feel that they've got better economic policies to rescue this country, then they should go and contest the elections and then be able to sell their own economic policies rather than come hard as they did on Tebogo Khaas, who I believe was quite entitled to do that. And embarrassingly, Tim, he had shared this document with the SACP Minister Blade Nzimande, as well as COSATU, apparently beforehand. So it might very well be that those leaders didn't share it with their own organizations, and therefore I think it's a bit unfair on Tebogo Khaas. And I think we have to carry on. We cannot be waiting for further consultation when government or the ministry is currently consulting the public. And if the SSCP or anyone else want to make input, they are more than welcome, just like everybody else, to make input in this draft strategy.
But I mean, that document talks about the constraints largely in the economy, all right, and that need to be liberalized or loosened up a little bit. Things like the modernizing of networks and also the making the spectrum available so that new IT players can come on board, and other things that it appears some of the things are within the government's purview. It's the government that can help spur on the opening up of the economy. But it is the government that is at fault, because even as he published that report, 7 billion rands was not being paid over to especially your sector, the small, medium-sized enterprises.
It is, I think, one thing that is very clear, or that has become well known, is that government is good at pronouncing policies or regulations or ideas. But in terms of fulfillment or making sure that it lives up to those promises, I think it falls very short. I mean, take again the issue of payment of SMEs on time. I remember then Premier Shilo was still Premier of Gauteng, and he spoke about payment of SMEs within 14 days, Even today, government still doesn't do it. I mean, to sit on a bill of 6-7 billion rands meant to be paid over to small businesses, it's quite unflattering for anybody else. And that it actually is government that is doing that in the midst of the dire economic environment that small businesses and even big business are facing is quite unfathomable.
Now, one of the points that the minister makes is that we've got to promote to promote export competitiveness, right, and harness regional growth opportunities. The events of this week, the violence against foreign nationals from other African countries, obviously undermines this intention on the part of the government.
The way I look at it is I think we are reaping the fruits of criminality. In other words, because government didn't focus a lot on combating crime, and now we see it happen where people are riding over the rules of xenophobia to actually loot, burn down, or even harm or even kill each other. And I think it's very sad that it's happening and directed to fellow Africans whom we also need to actually engage with in terms of economic exchanges. And it is sad that we are now in a situation that we are now, because South Africa, more than anybody else, I believe, does more trade, intra-continental trade, than any other country, I want to believe. And we're in a stronger position to actually be more leading in terms of economic development of the continent than be now boggled down with this type of, And countries such as Nigeria will jump on any opportunity to harm us economically. So even a slightest provocation, you'll see MTN being fined 5-10 billion, in Nigeria, even though it might not very well be justifiable. And it is said that government has procrastinated, they've sat on the rails, they've politicized these issues, they've blamed the DA, they've blamed Mayor Herman Mashaba, sometimes I believe, in fact, quite unfairly for his stance on trying to ensure that there's law and order. And unfortunately, it's now spiraled into open warfare, violence.
But there's another thing, when you listen to the rhetoric coming from politicians, especially those in government, that you wonder what the priority is for the government. Is it growth? Is it transformation? Is it making the labor regulations easier for business owners? It is never clear. What do you think their priority should be? And given the priority that you think should be, how should that be implemented?
Again, I take myself back to what I said when we started. Is the government's relationship or the ANC's relationship with the unions ought to be something that really gets to be decided upon. Where does the ANC want? What does the ANC want? You cannot have it both ways. We know that some of the policies that you would need, or even the action that is required of government, may not necessarily be pleasing or to the unions. Like, for example, we know that ESCOM some should even say is 40% overstaffed. In other words, if you want to bring ESCOM back to some semblance of normality, you have to cut down a number of employees. But that is something that won't sit well with the unions. But we know that it has to happen to be able to get economic growth. Telecom did it successfully, although there were upheavals at the times, but it was well managed. If you remember, the CWU didn't take very kindly to when Telecom was doing some attrition. But they did it well, and now look at Telecom. It has been able to be turned around to be something that is now functioning well without any government bailout. In fact, instead, it actually is contributing to the coffers of national treasury. So government ought to decide where it wants to be. Does it want to be... Because you cannot please labor, you cannot please business, you cannot please everybody at all the times. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Say, look,
And of course, the big problem facing South Africa that sometimes we forget to talk about this is the fact that we've got probably the highest unemployment rate, especially amongst the young people in the country, right? With what? 29% overall, 54% of those who are below the age of 35, and a great risk when it comes to the stability of the country. And everybody knows that. But it's not the unions and it's not government that will create those jobs, isn't it? It will be business itself. So what do you need as the SME sector, you think, from the policymakers and from the other interest groups then?
Government ought to, first of all, stop thinking in election cycles. In other words, stop making popular decisions just because you want to win the upcoming national elections or the upcoming provincial or metro election, municipal election. In other words, make policies that you know that they will contribute towards an enabling environment for small business, sustainable small business development. And once you've done that, make sure that you follow through in terms of your commitment to making sure that you remove red tape, to ensure that you settle SMEs invoices on time, to make sure that you don't interfere unnecessarily. But also, most importantly, government ought to be taking a long-term view and making sure that it takes small businesses in its confidence in terms of what it wants to do. For example, we know that there are suspicions that government wants to do nuclear. Nuclear, in other words, is not off the table completely. We should be identifying now, government ought to be saying, look, we intend doing nuclear in the next 10, 15, 20 years. But to do that, these are the kind of skill set that we're going to be needing. These are the kind of opportunities that are available for entrepreneurs and small businesses. Therefore, prepare yourself to be able to make sure when that opportunity comes, you can be able to do that. The same thing you can do with NHI, where there are opportunities, vast opportunities, IT-related opportunities, opportunities relating to smart card, around the smart card itself in terms of an enabler for access to the NHI system. There's a lot of application development, there's a lot of logistics, there's a lot of other things that could be actually to be done. But government ought to be able to say, these are the opportunities, or come and give us ideas that you can then be able to spawn into deliverables that will contribute to inclusive economic growth.
Well, the document that was published by the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, has called on members of the public to submit comments on the document by September 15th. We still have got a few days.
Not October?
Is it? Well, I've got it as September here, so it might have been extended to...
Maybe I've got the dates wrong myself.
Well, I've got it as September, but you may be right. But what would be your submission here if there's one critical issue that you'd like to see being attended to as a result of the document? What would that be?
Our major focus is actually going to be around the ICTs itself. I mean, we're talking about the smart card. We know that the contract for smart card has gone to a foreign-owned company, Thales, and locally Altec also. But we're saying, why would government be rewarding foreign companies when that type of expertise and competencies are available locally? So in other words, government ought to be rethinking that. And also, more importantly, Thales, we know that is the accused number 2 alongside former President Jacob Zuma on this ongoing saga of this arms deal. We're saying, why reward criminality, or why reward people who are with the propensity to corrupt government? But most importantly, going back to this, there are a lot of opportunities that could be made available that could help excite the IT sector locally. And we see that as one of the key things that can be used to actually open up the space for IT developments in many other forms, without me saying exactly what. But also construction. We see opportunities constructing new hospitals, refurbishing existing ones to make sure that they conform to norms and standards, where then opportunities could then be set aside for small business to partake in construction itself.
Well, I think, and thanks very much, Tebogo Khaas, for being my guest. And on the back of what you've just said, I would like to urge members of the public to also participate in making your submissions. You can find the document on www.treasury.gov.za. And it's the Inclusive Economic Growth document published by Minister of Finance Tito Mboweni 2 weeks ago. So please make sure you also have your say. And that's all we have for you. Thank you for joining the Modise Network. I'm inviting you to be with us again next week. And from us, enjoy the rest of your day.